Hello everyone, we're speaking today with Dr. Roman Töppel, and he's one of the leading military historians, especially on the Battle of Kursk. And you also did a lot of interviews with veterans.
Yeah.
And you're also a professional historian. So what was your what was your general experience with them?
First, I was very happy that I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of veterans and do interviews, because there are some historians who say, oh, what they say is nonsense and oral history is no, and veterans are not reliable. It's not my experience. Some of them, you have to have a lot of knowledge when you go to them. If you just go without knowledge and you believe everything they say, you are lost. But if you have already very good knowledge and special questions, then you can learn a lot from them. Not from all of them. I had really veterans, sometimes they even admitted, they say, okay, I can't remember these details. Yeah, there was one radio operator who was in a tank during the Battle of Kursk, and I asked him special questions. Yeah, when you crossed the river Psyol and so, I said, oh no, sorry, but these are details I don't know. And sometimes you often have the experience that they try to tell stories that they are not theirs. They read this somewhere and stuff, and you immediately realize, no, this cannot be correct. Or another radio operator from a tank I interviewed Battle of Kursk, and he said, no, we had at the Battle of Kursk, I'm sure we already had the Befehlspanther, the command panther version. No, it is not possible. At Kursk there was no Befehlspanther with this, especially with this division, Totenkopf division. But he was sure, and okay, maybe he was 1944 in a Panther, and he was impressed with this, and it's not been the case. But often you can cross-check. And you say, okay, what he tells you brings a little more detail into what you already know. And then you see, okay, this is reliable. And sometimes they are often connected with special circumstances. They say, oh, I remember this battle because it was my first battle. Or I remember this battle because I was wounded. And so I can remember many details. And so often I made good experience with veterans, World War veterans. Yeah.
So basically, to a certain degree, I always say, or one of my professors said, you can't write history from the trench. But the point is, if you have an important aspect where you need the trench perspective, then talking with veterans can make a lot of sense. So you don't ask them about the grand strategic thing, but more on details or basic understandings that sometimes, because there's a lot of knowledge out there that for them was so common that nobody writes about.
Exactly. Even if it comes to tactical things or words, even words. And nowadays I have to look it up somewhere, and sometimes I say to my wife, it would have been so easy 10 years ago when all these veterans, it would have been a phone call away. How was that with that company, and how did you call this and that? And now you have to look up on the internet or in your library and look up in the files, and it's really hard. And they were just a phone call away. Yeah.
For instance, one example we emailed about was unit and formation.
Yeah.
And in German it's Einheit or Verband or Großverband.
Yeah.
And I use this in my videos wrong for the most time. I try to correct it now, because up a certain point you speak about a formation or a Verband, and the smaller ones are only units and Einheiten. And to find actually in the sources, I ordered the one book from 1937, an encyclopedia about the German army, which is about 800 pages, but there's no entry on Verband, there's no entry on Einheit. I also read up on division and the other thing, but it's not mentioned. Yeah. But there's a difference between an Einheit and a Verband.
And to make it even more complicated, the Federal German Army, the modern German Army, uses a different system. Yeah, the Wehrmacht they said up to regimental level, it's a unit, and then when it's more than not a division, even when it's a brigade or a regiment where you add something, verstärktes Regiment. Verstärktes Regiment, then it's ein Verband, it's a formation. But the Bundeswehr, the Federal German Army, they use a different system. They say a battalion is already a Verband, a formation. So if you want to write historically correct, and you want to give the reader real thing from that time, from 1941, I tried to use the correct word for formation and stuff. And so I did a lot of research. I looked up in old encyclopedia, in old stuff. And when I thought I was sure, I had the chance to, there was one veteran who had contacted me, who had read my book about Kursk, and he said, oh, you have to get in contact because I'm one of the last Kursk veterans. And I could, is this true that you said, yeah, regiment was still a unit. It was an Einheit, and above regiment, it was a Verband, it was a formation. And 2 weeks later, this man died. Yeah.
So what was your most interesting experience in regard with that, or one very notable example which you had with a veteran?
The thing that got me most was one of the first veterans, I think the first veteran I always talked to, it was in the middle of the 1990s. And I had contact for 10, 15 years, then he died. And I had seen him so often, and he had written to me so often and sometimes called me. And after 10 years, he came up with the most shocking stories out of nowhere. Like he phoned me and said, I have to tell you something. After 10 years, and I experienced this, and I experienced war crimes and stuff. Can you tell me, did I do the right thing? From a student, I was a student at the time, 23, whatever. And this old man he wants me to tell him that, yeah, you did the right thing. And it was really shocking things, what he had experienced with close combat and war crimes and stuff. And how do you react as a young man? And this was quite interesting that he needed so long to open up, but when he did open up, he did it like, wow, without warning, buff. This was the most impressive thing, I think.
And I think you mentioned something when we had lunch, this example with the tiger and the bridge.
Yeah, exactly. This is an interesting thing that my credo as a historian is always use every available source. You can't say I just used the war diaries, it's enough, but the rest is not. Use everything. Use the later written reports from after the war. Use even photos. I found stuff on photos that didn't exist in the reports and stuff. And this was this very interesting story about the 7 bridges. There's a German song, you have to go over 7 bridges, and I almost wanted to entitle this chapter of the book over 7 bridges you have to pass, but that's what would have been nonsense in a book like this. But the Germans during the Battle of Kursk, when they attacked, they had to cross the Donetsk River in the area of the 3rd Panzer Corps, and they had 7 bridges for heavy and medium tanks. And there was one bridge that was actually destroyed by a Tiger tank, because this Tiger, the tanks with a 50-ton weight, they were not ready, and they had the smaller bridge with a 40-ton weight load, or whatever you call it in English, ready. And this Tiger commander, he didn't want to wait. The grenadiers were already attacking and had casualties, and he said, I will not wait here. And he tried to cross the Donetsk on this 24-ton bridge, and it collapsed. And you don't find this in the war diaries, nothing. And then I had a private diary from a Tiger Panzermann, who was a radio operator. And he writes in this little diary, oh, the bridge we crossed before collapsed. And I think another note, but nothing so. And he was alive at this time, and I was lucky enough to had several conversations. And I made sure that he always told me the same story. Sometimes you see, oh, this veteran, last time he talked, he said it differently. But this guy he always said in the exact words. He said, oh yeah, I remember this was this Feldwebel Krakow. He wanted to not wait, and he tried to cross the bridge, and it collapsed, and it was a scandal because he was. He could have been sent to a court martial, and so our superior said, okay, we cover this up, and we say, okay, the bridge got hit by artillery or whatever, but So you don't find this, but I could reveal this story because of this little diary note, and that the veteran who wrote this diary was still alive, and he told me 3 or 4 times in this, he knew the name of the commander, and everything fit. And when you take then the original files and you see there are 7 bridges, you have explanations of this 6, what happened to the 7th bridge. Apparently it all fits, and then it's a great piece of puzzle, yeah. And without this veteran, would have been lost.
Wouldn't have happened because I covered it up basically to prevent the court martial, so it
exactly
add it to your official war diary there.
Exactly.
So this is quite interesting to see that in some cases. Okay, you have to be also critical about the official diaries and everything. And yeah, it's quite complicated.
Yeah, and even some reports I got from the 4th Panzer Division, Panzer Regiment 35. They had a lot of reports written after the war, and they are quite valuable because when you read, there's one day, I think it was the 10th of July, you can read it in my book, there was a lot going wrong in the sector of the 4th Panzer Division. The commander broke in a little ravine, or with his command tank, couldn't get out, couldn't lead his division because he was under fire from Soviet soldiers, and everything went wrong. But you only read it in the post-war reports written by the soldiers who wrote about these 20 years later, because I looked it up on the original war diary of the 4th Panzer Division. I thought, what? There's nothing. It's only that says, oh, this day was a good success and blah, blah, blah. Nothing of all this, what misships on what went wrong. And so you have to rely, you can't just rely on one source, and even the war diary, or we talked about it earlier. There is one action in the Normandy. I want to write an article about this. And on 11th of June, there was a battle or a fight between the 12th SS Panzer Regiment, Hitlerjugend, and the Canadian Hussars. Yeah. And this is was a big thing, actually. It was a blowing defeat for the Hussars. They said it was the black day of the Hussars. Yeah, and when you look it up in the original war diary of the Hitlerjugend division, this little battle, the Gefecht, is not even mentioned. So you have to, when you take the Canadian reports, and when you take the reports written by the veterans after the war, then you can piece the puzzles together and you get the picture. But when you only rely on the war diary, this fighting would never have happened. Yeah.
Weren't there some incidents with this division in war crimes and the Canadians? Because
there was some too. Yeah.
Could this be related because it occurred there?
No, that had nothing to do with that. There was a different story. That was because no one came back from this battle, and there were just 3 Panzer IVs, and we know all about this. Well, later this soldier, Hans Siegel, who got awarded the Knight's Cross, but for a different action. But all the 3 Panzer IVs who were engaging the British and Canadians and made them suffer such horrific losses. The 3 Panzer IVs were destroyed by anti-tank guns when they tried to counterattack. And all of them were shot down. So the regimental commander or the battalion commander did not know about this action before the day was over. So they wrote the diary, and then Siegel came back later because he managed to get back to the German lines, and maybe when he made his report, it was already too late. And so later they didn't say, okay, we have to make an amendment or we have to add something. It was already written and said, okay.
Yeah.
So they are
not that important.
Not that important.
Anymore. Small skirmish here.
But it is an important story about guys of you who know a bit about the Hitlerjugend division, and maybe some of you have some knowledge more than I have. But this Hans Siegel later was awarded the Knight's Cross, and I met him. I talked to him several times, and he was always a bit. I think he was like disappointed that no one saw this action that day, because I think he thought he had deserved the Knight's Cross for this action that day. And he always talked about, he didn't really want to talk about the other battle when he really got his Knight's Cross for. He always talked about this 11th June and no one saw this, but it was a decisive and he did not get nothing. He got nothing for it. But it was what I would say a typical deed worth a Knight's Cross. And he regretted until the end of his life that no one had seen this action who could recommend him for the Knight's Cross. Yeah. But I will write something about this. I hope soon when I have time. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. I think we covered everything. So
okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining and thank you for watching. Bye.
Bye.